The sheriff's deputies arrived at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, their badges gleaming in the autumn sunlight like weapons drawn for battle. Marcus Williams stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, watching three uniformed officers stride across his perfectly manicured lawn. Behind them, a moving truck idled at the curb, its diesel engine rumbling like distant thunder. "Daddy, why are there police cars outside?" 7-year-old Zoe's voice cut through the morning stillness, her small hand tugging at Marcus's pajama sleeve. Her school backpack hung from one shoulder, ready for another day of second grade that would never come. Marcus set down his mug with trembling fingers. $5. This was all happening because of $5 in late fees that had accumulated over 3 months of medical bills and reduced work hours. $5 that had somehow become the spark that would ignite a war nobody saw coming. "Stay with your sister," he whispered to Zoe, then called upstairs. "Keisha, they're here." The doorbell rang with an authority that seemed to shake the entire house. Marcus opened it to find Deputy Stevens, a man whose weathered face had seen too many of these moments, holding an eviction notice that fluttered in the morning breeze. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry, but we're here to execute a court order for immediate eviction. You have 15 minutes to gather essential items only." Marcus's world tilted. There has to be some mistake. We're only behind $5. We were going to pay it today. Deputy Stevens's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Sir, according to this order, you've been given multiple notices. The HOA has requested immediate removal." Behind Marcus, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Keisha Williams appeared, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her dark eyes blazed with a fury that could have melted steel. "Officer, my husband is telling the truth. We've been struggling since I had to take unpaid leave for my cancer treatment. $5. That's all we owe." The deputy's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, what's your status?" "Beginning eviction process at 1247 Maple Grove Drive," Stevens responded, his voice echoing across the neighborhood. Windows began opening along the street. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house across the way, her silver hair catching the morning light. The Johnsons stepped onto their porch, their faces masks of confusion and concern. This was Willowbrook Estates, where neighbors knew each other's children's names and borrowed sugar on Sunday mornings. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. The Williams family had lived in their corner house for 8 years, transforming it from a simple colonial into a warm home with Keisha's herb garden and Marcus's workshop in the garage. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, she as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. They were the family that organized block parties and shoveled elderly neighbors' driveways in winter. Then came the lump in Keisha's breast, discovered during a routine self-exam on a quiet Thursday evening. The biopsy, the surgery, the months of chemotherapy that left her too weak to work. Marcus had taken family leave, using up their savings and watching their carefully maintained budget crumble like sandcastles at high tide. The HOA fees had been the last thing on their minds. $95 monthly, automatically withdrawn from their checking account for years. But when the medical bills began arriving like an avalanche, they'd made the difficult decision to temporarily pause the automatic payment. They'd called the HOA management office, spoken with Sandra Martinez, the office manager, and explained their situation. "I understand completely," Sandra had said, her voice warm with sympathy. "My own mother went through cancer treatment. Just catch up when you can. We'll note your account." But Sandra had been replaced in June. The new property manager was Karen Whitmore, a woman whose blonde hair was always perfectly styled and whose smile never quite reached her eyes. She'd arrived with new policies, new procedures, and zero tolerance for late payments. The first notice had arrived in July, demanding immediate payment of $285, 3 months of dues plus late fees. Marcus had called the office, explaining their situation again, asking for a payment plan. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry, but rules are rules. Previous management may have been lenient, but we're running a business here. Payment in full, or we'll begin legal proceedings." Karen's voice had been crisp, professional, and utterly without warmth. "We can't make exceptions for every sob story." Marcus had scraped together $280, leaving them $5 short. He'd called again, explaining that he'd pay the remaining balance with his next paycheck in 2 days. "I'm sorry, but partial payment is not acceptable. The full amount must be paid immediately." Now, standing in his doorway with deputies at his threshold, Marcus realized how naive he'd been to think $5 wouldn't matter. In Karen Whitmore's world, $5 was worth destroying a family's life. "Please," Keisha said to Deputy Stevens, her voice breaking. "Can't we just pay it right now? I have cash." Stevens looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, this is a court order. I can't override it. You'll need to contact the HOA or your attorney." From upstairs came the sound of 10-year-old Isaiah crying. Zoe had run to comfort her brother, her small voice explaining that they had to leave their home. The sound of children's tears mixed with the diesel rumble of the moving truck created a symphony of heartbreak that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Marcus pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed the HOA office. It rang 4 times before Karen's voice answered, sickeningly cheerful. "Willowbrook Estates Management. Karen speaking." "Karen, this is Marcus Williams. The deputies are here to evict us. We can pay the $5 right now. Please, just call them off." There was a pause. Then Karen's voice returned, colder now. "Mr. Williams, you've had months to resolve this. The eviction process has already begun. Perhaps this will serve as a lesson about the importance of meeting your obligations." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, unable to process the callousness he'd just heard. A lesson. They were losing their home as a lesson. Mrs. Patterson had crossed the street, her face flushed with indignation. "Officer, what's this about? The Williams are good people." "Ma'am, I'm just following a court order. Please step back." But Mrs. Patterson didn't step back. Instead, she pulled out her own phone and began filming. "This is wrong. Dead wrong." More neighbors appeared. The Johnsons, the Lees, the Rodriguezes. Families from all backgrounds united in their shock and anger. Sarah Johnson, a local teacher, approached with her arms crossed. "How much does the family owe?" she demanded. "Ma'am, I can't discuss." $5, Marcus said, his voice hollow. "We owe $5. A gasp went through the crowd. Sarah Johnson's face went white. $5. You're evicting a family with children for $5. Tom Rodriguez, a retired firefighter, stepped forward. "Here's $10, he said, pulling out his wallet. "Problem solved." Deputy Stevens shook his head. "Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but it's too late. The court order has to be executed. The moving crew began their work, carrying boxes and furniture from the Williams home with mechanical efficiency. Each item that emerged, Zoe's bicycle, Keisha's grandmother's rocking chair, Marcus's workbench, felt like another wound opened in the neighborhood's collective heart. Keisha sat on the front steps, her face buried in her hands. The chemo had taken her hair, but not her dignity. She looked up at the gathering crowd, her eyes filled with tears and something else, a fierce determination that would soon change everything. "This isn't about $5, she said, her voice carrying across the street. "This is about who gets to live in peace and who doesn't. This is about who gets mercy and who gets the boot." Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously. "Keisha's right. The Hendersons owed 3 months' dues last year, and Karen worked out a payment plan for them." A murmur went through the crowd. The Hendersons, a white family who'd struggled after Tom Henderson lost his job, had indeed been given time to catch up on their dues. No eviction notices, no deputies, no public humiliation. Sarah Johnson was typing furiously on her phone. "I'm calling Channel 7. This is news." As the morning progressed, the Williams family's possessions continued to emerge from their home. The moving truck swallowed their lives with indifferent efficiency. Neighbors offered their guest rooms, their basements, their couches. The community rallied around the family, but it felt like trying to stop a flood with their bare hands. By noon, the house was empty. The Williams family stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by their belongings and their neighbors, homeless in their own neighborhood. Marcus held Zoe's hand, while Keisha cradled Isaiah, who'd cried himself to sleep. "Where will we go?" Zoe asked, her voice small and frightened. Before Marcus could answer, Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "You'll stay with me until we figure this out. All of you." The Johnsons nodded agreement. "We'll take some of your things. Store them in our garage." Tom Rodriguez was still filming, his face grim. "This is going on every social media platform I have. The whole world is going to see what happened here today." As if summoned by his words, a white news van rounded the corner. Channel 7. News had arrived, their camera crew moving with practiced efficiency. Reporter Lisa Chen emerged, her expression serious as she surveyed the scene. "Mr. Williams, I'm Lisa Chen from Channel 7. Can you tell me what happened here?" Marcus looked at the camera, then at his family, then at the neighbors who'd become his army. "We were evicted for being $5 behind on our HOA fees. $5. While we were fighting cancer. While we were trying to survive. Karen Whitmore decided $5 was worth destroying our family." The camera rolled, capturing not just Marcus's words, but the faces of the neighbors behind him. Faces filled with outrage, determination, and something that looked like revolution. That evening, the story led the local news. Family evicted over $5 HOA fee flashed across television screens throughout the city. The footage of the Williams family standing beside their possessions, of their neighbors forming a protective circle around them, of little Zoe asking where they would go. It struck a nerve that reverberated far beyond Willowbrook Estates. The next morning, Marcus's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, civil rights organizations, and strangers offering help flooded his voicemail. But the call that mattered most came from attorney David Kim, a civil rights lawyer who'd seen the news coverage. "Mr. Williams, I'd like to represent your family. I don't think this is about $5 at all. I think this is about something much bigger." David Kim was a small man with large glasses and an even larger reputation for taking on impossible cases. He'd built his career fighting housing discrimination, and something about the Williams case had caught his attention immediately. "I want to do some research," he explained to Marcus and Keisha as they sat in Mrs. Patterson's living room. "I want to look at every eviction this HOA has processed in the past 5 years. I want to see who gets payment plans and who gets the boot." What David Kim found over the next 2 weeks would shock even him. The HOA records, obtained through a legal filing, painted a picture of systematic bias that was breathtaking in its scope. The Henderson family, white, 3 months behind, had been given a 6-month payment plan with no late fees. The Kowalski family, white, 4 months behind, had been allowed to pay in installments over a year. The Martinez family, Latino, 2 months behind, had been evicted within 30 days. The Johnson family, black, 1 month behind, had been threatened with legal action immediately. But it was the discovery of the Chen family's file that made David Kim's blood run cold. The Chens, an Asian family, had been 6 months behind on their dues. Karen Whitmore had not only arranged a payment plan, but had personally waived their late fees, noting in the file that they were good people going through a difficult time. The pattern was unmistakable. White families received mercy, patience, and flexible payment options. Families of color received threats, legal action, and eviction notices. The Williams family's $5 debt was just the most egregious example of a system designed to push out anyone who didn't fit Karen Whitmore's vision of the perfect neighborhood. David Kim called Marcus with his findings on a Friday afternoon. "Marcus, I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry, but it's also going to give us the ammunition we need to fight back." As David read through the evidence, Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. It wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about every family of color that had been pushed out, every child who'd been forced to leave their home, every dream that had been crushed by Karen Whitmore's prejudice. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "We file a class action lawsuit. We expose this for what it is, systematic racial discrimination, and we make sure this never happens to another family." The news of the lawsuit broke on a Monday morning, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. The local chapter of the NAACP issued a statement supporting the Williams family. The City Council announced an investigation into HOA practices. Protesters gathered outside the Willowbrook Estates office, holding signs that read, $5 actually racism, and justice for the Williams family. Karen Whitmore, who had been confident in her actions, suddenly found herself under siege. The HOA board, initially supportive, began to distance themselves as the evidence mounted. Board President Robert Sterling called an emergency meeting. "Karen, we need to talk about how you've been handling delinquent accounts," he said, his voice tight with concern. Karen's response was defiant. "I've been following policy. These people need to learn responsibility." "These people," Sterling repeated, his eyebrows rising. "Karen, do you hear yourself?" But Karen was beyond hearing. She'd convinced herself that she was the victim, that the Williams family and their liberal allies were trying to destroy her career over a simple business decision. She doubled down, giving interviews to conservative media outlets about the importance of personal responsibility and following the rules. Each interview made things worse. Karen's words, stripped of context and broadcast across social media, revealed the depth of her prejudice. When asked about the disparity in treatment between white and minority families, she claimed it was coincidental and that she treated everyone the same. The tipping point came when Channel 7 aired a devastating investigation. Lisa Chen had spent weeks documenting the HOA's discriminatory practices, interviewing evicted families, and uncovering a pattern of bias that stretched back years. The centerpiece of her report was a recorded phone call between Karen and the Henderson family, where Karen could be heard saying, "Of course we can work something out. You're good people, and we take care of our own." The phrase, "we take care of our own," became a rallying cry for the growing movement around the Williams case. T-shirts appeared with the slogan crossed out and replaced with, "We take care of each other." The story went national, with cable news shows discussing the case and social media activists sharing the "Wash Justice for Williams" hashtag. Through it all, the Williams family remained in Mrs. Patterson's guest room, their lives in limbo while the legal battle raged. Marcus had returned to work, but the stress was taking its toll. Keisha, still recovering from her cancer treatment, found herself thrust into the role of reluctant spokesperson for victims of housing discrimination. The children struggled most of all. Zoe had been transferred to a new school, leaving behind friends and teachers she'd known since kindergarten. Isaiah, always sensitive, had begun having nightmares about police officers taking away their toys. The family that had once felt secure and rooted now felt like refugees in their own community. But the neighborhood hadn't forgotten them. Every evening, neighbors would gather on Mrs. Patterson's porch, sharing meals and stories, planning their next moves in the fight for justice. The Williams family had become more than just neighbors. They'd become symbols of resistance against a system that treated people differently, based on the color of their skin. Sarah Johnson had organized a boycott of local businesses that advertised with the HOA management company. Tom Rodriguez had started a legal defense fund that raised over $50,000 in 3 weeks. Mrs. Patterson had become the unofficial general in an army of suburban warriors determined to right a wrong. The HOA board, feeling the pressure from all sides, finally called a special meeting to address the crisis. The community center had never seen such a crowd. Families from across the neighborhood packed the room, with overflow attendees gathering in the parking lot to listen through speakers. Karen Whitmore sat at the front table, her face a mask of defiance and fear. She'd hired her own attorney, a sharp-dressed man who kept whispering urgent advice in her ear. The board members flanked her, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Robert Sterling gavelled the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to address the recent events involving the Williams family eviction and the subsequent legal action. The board wants to assure everyone that we take these allegations seriously." "Do you?" The voice came from the back of the room. Marcus Williams stepped forward, his family beside him, their neighbors forming a protective circle around them. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're circling the wagons to protect someone who destroyed my family over $5. The room erupted in applause. Sterling banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Mr. Williams, you'll have a chance to speak during the public comment period." "I'm speaking now," Marcus replied, his voice steady and strong. "You want to know what this is really about? It's about my daughter asking me why we had to leave our home. It's about my son having nightmares about police officers. It's about my wife recovering from cancer and having to fight for our right to exist in this neighborhood." He turned to face the crowd, then back to the board. "But it's also about the Martinez family, evicted after 2 months, the Johnson family, threatened after 1 month, the Chen family, given a free pass after 6 months. You want to tell me that's not about race?" David Kim stepped forward, a thick folder in his hands. "I have documentation of every eviction and payment plan processed by this HOA under Ms. Whitmore's management. The pattern is clear and legally indefensible." He began reading statistics, case studies, documented evidence of systematic discrimination. With each example, the room grew quieter, the weight of the evidence settling over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Karen Whitmore finally stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. I enforce the rules equally for everyone. If certain families can't manage their finances, that's not my problem." The room exploded in angry voices. "Mrs. Patterson stood up, her elderly frame shaking with indignation. "Shame on you," she shouted. "Shame on you for destroying a family over $5 while giving white families months to catch up. Shame on you for looking at children and seeing dollar signs instead of human beings." The crowd took up the chant, "Shame, shame, shame." Karen's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. "I don't have to listen to this. I've dedicated my career to maintaining property values and community standards. If that means enforcing rules strictly, then so be it." Community standards. Keisha Williams stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Is evicting a family fighting cancer part of your community standards? Is racial discrimination part of your community standards?" The room fell silent. Keisha, who had spoken little during the public battle, commanded attention with her quiet dignity and fierce presence. "I want everyone to understand something," she continued. "This isn't just about us. It's about every family who's been pushed out, every child who's been forced to leave their home, every dream that's been crushed by prejudice disguised as policy." She turned to Karen, her eyes blazing. "You want to talk about community standards? How about the standard of treating people with basic human decency? How about the standard of giving everyone the same chance to succeed?" Karen's composure finally cracked. "You people always make everything about race. Maybe if you managed your money better, if you planned ahead, if you took responsibility for your actions." "You people!" The words hung in the air like a curse. Even Karen's attorney put his head in his hands. David Kim smiled grimly. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. That statement will be very helpful in court." The board voted that night to suspend Karen Whitmore pending a full investigation. The decision was unanimous, with even her staunchest supporters abandoning her after her public meltdown. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Marcus Williams remained focused on the bigger picture. "This is just the beginning," he told the reporters who swarmed him afterward. "We're not just fighting for our family. We're fighting for every family that's been pushed out, and we're fighting to make sure this never happens again." The legal battle continued for months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. The public support was massive, and Karen Whitmore's own words had sealed her fate. The class action lawsuit resulted in a settlement that included financial compensation for all affected families, a complete overhaul of HOA policies, and the establishment of a community oversight board to prevent future discrimination. Karen Whitmore was not just fired. She was criminally charged with civil rights violations. Her real estate license was revoked, and she faced potential prison time. The investigation had uncovered not just discriminatory practices, but actual fraud, as she had been embezzling funds from the HOA accounts to cover her own expenses. But the real victory came on a warm spring morning. 6 months after the eviction, the Williams family walked back into their home, carrying boxes and furniture with the help of their neighbors. The same neighbors who had stood by them during their darkest hour were now helping them reclaim their lives. The house looked the same, but everything was different. The garden had been maintained by Mrs. Patterson, who had organized a rotation of neighbors to care for it. The lawn was perfectly manicured, thanks to Tom Rodriguez and his riding mower. Inside, the walls had been freshly painted by volunteer neighbors, and the refrigerator was stocked with casseroles and welcome home treats. Zoe ran through the rooms, her laughter echoing off the walls she'd thought she'd never see again. Isaiah set up his toys in his old room, the nightmares finally beginning to fade. Marcus stood in his workshop, running his hands over the tools that had been carefully stored and returned, while Keisha planted new herbs in her garden. The new HOA management company had been selected by the community, with input from every resident. The new policies included mandatory bias training, transparent accounting, and a community advisory board with representatives from every demographic group in the neighborhood. Most importantly, the Williams family had established a foundation to help other families facing housing discrimination. The legal settlement had provided the seed money, but donations poured in from across the country. They hired advocates, provided legal aid, and created a network of support for families under attack. On the first anniversary of their eviction, the neighborhood threw a block party. The entire street was closed off, with tables stretching from one end to the other. Families of all backgrounds gathered to celebrate not just the Williams family's return, but the community they'd all built together. As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, Marcus Williams stood on his front porch, watching his children play with their friends in the yard he'd thought they'd lost forever. Keisha joined him, her hair beginning to grow back, her strength returning day by day. "Do you think we changed anything?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. Marcus looked out at the diverse group of neighbors sharing food and stories, at the "all are welcome" signs that had appeared in yards throughout the neighborhood, at the children playing together without seeing color or difference. "I think we changed everything," he said softly. $5 almost destroyed our family, but in the end, it built something beautiful. Mrs. Patterson approached, carrying a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies. "I wanted to thank you both," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "You could have just moved away, started over somewhere else. Instead, you stayed and fought, and you made all of us better." As the evening wound down and neighbors began cleaning up, David Kim approached with a folder under his arm. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing it to Marcus. "It's the final report on the investigation. Karen Whitmore has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for embezzlement and civil rights violations." Marcus nodded, but his focus was on the children still playing in the yard. "I'm glad she's being held accountable, but that's not what this was about. This was about making sure no other family has to go through what we did." The foundation they'd established had already helped 12 families fight housing discrimination, with a 100% success rate. More importantly, it had sparked a national conversation about bias in housing management and the need for stronger oversight of HOA practices. As the last neighbors headed home, the Williams family sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. They'd been through hell and back, but they'd emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to fight for justice. "Daddy," Zoe said, curling up in Marcus's lap, "are we going to stay here forever?" Marcus looked at his daughter, then at his wife, then at the house that had become so much more than just a home. It was a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope, and a testament to the power of community standing together against injustice. "Forever and a day," he said, kissing the top of her head. "This is our home, and nobody is ever going to take it away from us again." The $5 war had ended, but the victory belonged to everyone who had refused to let prejudice win. In a world that too often divides people by race, class, and background, the Williams family and their neighbors had proven that justice, community, and basic human decency could still prevail. The streetlights came on, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood where every family now knew they belonged. The Williams family had lost their home for $5, but they'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that when good people stand together, no injustice is too powerful to overcome. And in the end, that was worth far more than any amount of money could ever buy.